if you're here. So, moving into the first talk of the day, this is on writing effective technical content. I refuse to share slides because I want this to be as interactive as possible. And I would go over my process, how I have created content that's reached, hundreds of thousands, probably up to a million people. I'll cut myself some slack at this point. How I've been able to create effective content that's reached people, and also what we do at Hackmamba, the process we take to create effective technical content. And by effective, I mean content that meets desired outcomes that we set. I probably would make this talk into a long form article so you can read it and reference it over time. But starting with, the first thing we do when we want to create content is we look at why. We ask ourselves, why do we want to write this article? What's the desired outcome? Do we want to educate people on how to use a specific feature? Do we want to write a tutorial of how to do ABC with XYZ, right? So why do we want to write this? And better put, we articulate the outcome of this. And we typically would write at the end of the day or after reading this article, we want the user to be able to do this. We want the user to be able to upload images to Cloudinary. That's an outcome. That's why. After we've defined why, we go into defining who. So who is this for? Is this for a beginner? Is this for someone with experience in JavaScript, right? We start to think about like the language. We want to model the ideal user. Is this an experienced user? Is this an engineer? Is this a product manager? Right? Once we've clearly articulated why and who, and we do this for every piece of content, we go into how. Now, how is this is the body of work. This is where you get to writing. Remember, we start with why, we start with who, and these help us define how. And the first step when defining how is we have to do some research. So when you're writing, people expect you to be a subject matter expert. Actually, you should be someone with authority, And by authority, I do not mean you have to be very experienced, like an experienced engineer. You could be writing about HTML and you've written HTML for the last 1 year consistently every day. That gives you some authority, right? So you could need to do some research if there are some gaps in your knowledge. After that, after doing some research and gathering information, credible information, because you can find a lot of unuseful stuff on the internet, you would get to the title. This is where a lot of people get it wrong. They just put about any title, but there's a system to coming up with a title. And the first thing you would have to note is your title has to be short. You will want to, the rule of thumb for me is I look at Google, right? I think on average, how many words do I need to see on the title of of an article to that would either catch my attention and also that would fit within the screen, right? So I would say you keep your title as short as possible, right? The shorter, the better. Next, you want your title to be easy to recognize, right? So you don't want people, breaking their head trying to figure out what exactly does this title say. If you share it on Twitter, you want people to see the title and go like, oh yeah, I know what this article could talk about, right? Another thing you could do is you could make it catchy. This depends on your intention as well. You could phrase your title in such a way if someone sees it, they want to try it out, they want to read this post, they want to check it out. Another tip on titles is you want to try to guess what a user will search for. I haven't shared this with anyone before. Now I'm sharing this here. So you will want to find out, as a developer, when I go on Google or I go on Stack Overflow, what would I search for when I have a specific problem, or when I have this problem that you've defined an outcome for. So using the example of I want to upload an image to Cloudinary, as a developer or as a user that have defined what would I search for. Typically, I would search for how to upload an image to Cloudinary. That's a very good title. If that's your outcome, you should make that your title. You shouldn't make it uploading images to Cloudinary with, or just try to make it match, closely with what a developer um, or what your user has or would search for. Lastly, with selecting titles, you shouldn't be afraid if someone has written a particular article or a particular title about a particular problem before. Every day, new ways arise to solve the same problem. And if that helps, in JavaScript, there are new versions of a particular tool that come up just about every other week, right? And so, Google also highlights the most recent solution to a problem or the most recent content that's written for certain keywords. So if you see an article that was written 5 years ago, yes, fine, you can write your own opinion. You can use like even better technology to create that content, and that should reflect also in the title. So after writing out the title, the next thing you would want to do is you get to the outline. The outline pretty much is a blueprint of your content. It gives you direction, right? It's kind of the north star for your content. You would want this title to be as chronological as possible and follow logical steps, right? So by that I mean you would want to start with an introduction and you would want to end with a conclusion. And if it's a tutorial, you would want to structure the outline in such a way that if someone were to follow this one step, after the other, they would arrive at the same conclusion as you. They wouldn't follow it. When they follow your content, you don't want them to, hit their head on the wall and ask, what have I done? Or how does this even work? Right? So the outline should also be chronological and follow, logical steps. I believe every content piece, every outline should have an introduction, a body, and a summary. The introduction introduces you or tells a very short story of the content, whereas the summary recaps everything that's been thought in the blog post. And yeah, just to recap, this applies to blog posts. So moving on from the outline, the next thing you would want to complete is the code. So in this case, the product or the feature that you're building. Here, you're expected to be an engineer. So if you're writing a technical blog post, you would either want to build a demo that's on GitHub, or you would want to use a web-based IDE like Code Sandbox or Stack Blitz. But you would, create the code. You would want it to be clear. You would want to put as much comments as possible, because someone entirely new on the internet will be looking at your code, right? So once you've created the code, you've written the code should also match your outline, right? So in the code, if you say imported a module and then later you defined, say, the HTML content, you would want your content outline to follow the same structure. If say in the example of uploading an image to Cloudinary, if your first step is to find the image, right? Find the image where it's stored locally. And then the second step is to define a function that would upload this image to Cloudinary. Your outline should also follow the same steps, the same way you've built the code. Once you've written the code and this is clear, you then move back to the content proper. So now you're armed with, you have your outline, you have the code, you know who you're writing for, and you know what you expect the reader to gain out of this article. Everything already seems complete, right? So at this point, you can go in to create the content. As for the content, you will want to structure your content properly. You would want to make sure there is a good use of white space. You don't want someone to read your content and end up with like brain problems. So you want to structure it properly. You also want to watch the length of your content. As for technical blog posts, you would want to keep the content within from 1,000 words to 1,500, 1,800 words. And this is very important, right? Typically, as developers, when you see a blog post that is 2,500 words or 3,000 words, this is becoming a newspaper. This is becoming a course, right? Uh, to find a solution, you would have to go through, most times, go through all that. You would need a lot of brain power to figure out where exactly in this long piece of content does your solution live, right? So keep the content as short as possible. And in the case where you're unable to, keep the content really short, maybe think about splitting it into two, having like a part one and a part two, right? Or you can just be very specific with the feature you're describing. Every other thing should either come in a boilerplate code or content you've written previously, and you talk about only the specific feature that you're working on. That way you keep the outcome of that content pretty focused. So next thing after the length is the headings. Two things to note about the headings. In as much as you want the headings to be descriptive, you would want to optimize them for SEO as well. So the headings should also communicate logical problem points, right? Or solution points, rather, solution points that a user would want to see, right? So when uploading an image to Cloudinary, for instance, you would want to have a heading for defining prerequisites. So everything you need to install, you need a heading for that. The next heading could be creating a Cloudinary account. And you keep the heading straight, direct, straight to the point as well. You want to have as many headings as there are key points in your article. You don't want to have a blog post that has 3 headings and every other thing is just text. For every sizable chunk of content with a specific context, right? So maybe defining your modules or installing dependencies, you want to have a heading that captures that. As a user or as a reader, when I see an article like this and I scan through it, I can immediately pick out what portion of this article my solution would be in. Yeah, just checking in the comments if there are any questions. But yeah, after the heading, you continue with creating the content. Now you want your content to be as clear as possible, no fluff. You want to go straight to the point. You want to make it coincide, right? No filler words. You construct your sentences as short as possible. So you don't want to have 3 lines of text with commas in between without pause. So you want to write as many short, straight to the point sentences as possible. And a pro tip again is when creating content, you need to find your voice. Now, this is a tricky part when finding your voice. You want to find a balance between your normal informal voice, so how you talk to your friends and your family members, and your professional voice, how you would write a book. You want to strike a balance between those. You don't want to write content that's too informal and uses, everyday your everyday lingo. You want something that's, semi-formal, I would say. That's up to you to find out. You can also read like articles that have been written by other people to see how they do this. Also, this would take practice and writing consistently to figure out. The next thing to consider when creating content is the pronouns you use. So a lot of times I see people create content and they start the tutorial. For instance, they start a tutorial by saying, we do ABC with XYZ. So they refer to themselves as as the subject. Whereas some other authors refer to the reader as the subject. So you say something like, you call this function to print or to log the result of the API call, right? You can use one or the other, but not both. So when you're writing, you can say, we will make an API call, or you say, you will make an API call. Not in one part of the article, you say, we do this, and then in another part, you say, you do that. It most times confuses just about any reader. So pick a pronoun. You're either referring to yourself as a subject, or you're referring to the reader as a subject. So you use we, our, and never use I. If you're tempted to write I, remove that thought. You use we, you use our, and when you're referring to the reader as a subject, you use you and your. So once you have the pronouns done, another thing to consider is some of the terms, some of the words you use. You can find synonyms for, overly used words. You could just use Google to find synonyms for certain words like create, usual, import. Where it's not required to use a specific word, if you find out that you're overusing a certain word, then just find a synonym for that. Also, never use the word easy. It could be easy for you, but it's not easy for someone else. So most times people are tempted to write, this is easy to do, or it's easy to import this, or it's simple. So easy and simple, no, it's simple to upload an image to Cloudinary. I keep using Cloudinary. I just really like them. Yeah, 1 second, sorry. Great. Yeah, so never use the words easy or simple. Once you're done with this. As you progress through the content, there's the need to embed certain other elements. You want to embed code blocks, you want to embed images, you want to embed videos. With the code block, there is also a technique to that. As code blocks are drastically different from text content, they come in chunks, right? And a good rule of thumb is to never let your code block exceed 50 lines of code. If it exceeds 50 lines, you need to split that into two, or split that into multiple parts, and explain each portion with as much context as possible. And for every code block you write, it should contain context of what the code does, possibly even comments, but try to keep it within 50 lines of code as much as possible. If it has to go beyond 50 lines, what we do at Hackmamba, for instance, is we put it in a GitHub gist. And GitHub gists shouldn't go beyond 100 lines, right? So this is a clear case of where a reader encounters a code block while reading through content. It wouldn't make sense if a reader is scanning through, okay, first line, the 20th line, the 50th line, 150, 200. That's already like a blog post on its own. So you want to split the code blocks into chunks as much as possible. Yeah, thanks, Kobe. About still on the code blocks, you should never post screenshots of your code. While you might be tempted to just take a screenshot and put it in code, this isn't so useful for your reader. Typically, as we know, developers, from going to Stack Overflow every now and then, you want to hit Ctrl+C to get lines of code. But if it's a screenshot, you're unable to do that. You would have to look at the code, go and write it, and that's stressful, right? So try as much as possible to use inline embedded code blocks, and almost all tools, even Markdown, natively supports inline embedded code blocks. So you want to try that. You want to use that as much as possible. And while you do this, always keep the reader in mind. Remember, if your reader is a beginner, you want to make sure both the code and the content you write matches matches the reader. So having all this in mind, you've successfully, created the code. It matches the user persona. You have you've written the content. You've added like your embeds. You've added images. Remember, an image is worth 1,000 words. So where you can use images, totally, you should use them. You've written these. The next thing, obviously, is to review this content, and reviews are just as important as actually writing the code. And a couple of things to keep in mind when reviewing content is: one, you want to review it for SEO. You want your content to impact as many people as possible. You want it to reach as many readers as possible. So you want to ensure the title, like I said earlier, is short. The headers communicates the point clearly. The introductory portion of your article talks about the problem that article is trying to solve. So earlier I said the problem here is I want to teach someone how to upload an image to Cloudinary, right? Or I want to teach someone how to retrieve an entry on a database that's on Zata. This should be clearly communicated in the introductory portion. So the introduction could say something like, this post teaches you how to upload an image to Cloudinary, right? When a user reads this, also when it's indexed by Google, that automatically shows up as one of the first texts in the post. So you want to review your post for SEO, and you could Google other SEO tips for your blog posts. A really cool trick I do is with UTM links. So UTM links or UTM parameters are a way for marketing teams and marketing organizations to identify the sources and the mediums of different blog posts or their pages, right? So something I do with UTM links is, if I'm writing, say, a blog post that doesn't concern anybody, but I'm using a relatively, or a tool that the company doesn't know who I am. I'm thinking of some tool. Say I use Auth0, for instance. I would add a UTM campaign parameter that says William's article or iChulo's post. And if for any reason that blog post should get 5,000 views, right? And in the blog post, the readers click on that link to Auth0 that has a UTM parameter with William, the marketing team or the organization, in whatever analytics tool they would use, they would see William's post, or this traffic came from this blog post that was written by this person. And that's how you get like even noticed. That's how they would reach out to you if they weren't aware of your blog post. So try to use UTM parameters as much as possible. You can also Google what UTM parameters mean. After you've reviewed the UTM parameters, something you would want to conduct a personal review, and this is very, very important. So I see a lot of writers and a lot of authors create content, but they just, once they are done, they send it out. Most times when you're done writing and you review your article, that's when you see all the mistakes and everything that, things that you might have missed. And a good way to review a technical blog post is to go through it like a reader. Clear your mind, go through the blog post, try to rebuild the demo you've built solely from the blog post. Assume you do not know anything of the code, and just try to rebuild the demo using the content you have created. That would expose a lot of flaws. And when you do this, if it's a browser-based project, run it in incognito mode. That could expose also a lot of things. Try to run it in the most neutral environment you can find. Yeah. So after a personal review of your code and your content, you want to conduct a grammar review. of your content. And for grammar reviews, typically I rely on tools to do that because I just review them myself. So I would use Grammarly or the Hemingway app, and these are free tools. At least with their free tier, you can get enough value to create a decent post. So I would run an article through Grammarly, and the machine looks over it again and says, "Hey, you've missed this punctuation somewhere, or um, you have a typo here." I then go in to make such changes. The Hemingway app tells you to split sentences and says, "Hey, this sentence is too, it's too complex, or it's too long. You need to split it so it's more coherent." And lastly, with reviews, I rely heavily on peer reviews. So I get um, I get a lot more people, or I send this content to my friends, my peers, people in the community to say, "Hey, you could just have a look at this content and provide whatsoever review you have." If you know me, you can also send me your articles. I would be happy to have a look at them. Once you're done with the reviews and this is satisfactory, you'll want to get to the next step of creating your content, which is publishing it and distributing it. There are a lot of platforms to publish your content, the content you've created. There's for developers, I would go with dev.to because they give you they have like very high SEO ranking, or they have really good visibility. They give your post really good visibility. You could use dev.to, you could use Hashnode, you can try Medium, but still not so sure of Medium. And ultimately, you can always grow your own blog. And a good thing about posting on your blog is after putting content on your blog, you can cross post it on dev.to, right? You just need to specify using a canonical URL. You need to specify which version of that content is the original one. This will tell Google what to show users when they enter a search query that closely matches your article. So say I wrote a blog post that describes how to upload an image to Cloudinary, this example blog post I used. I would put it on my blog on Hackmamba, right? And on dev.to, I would post the same article word for word. I wouldn't change anything. But in the settings for the article, you can add a canonical URL. That canonical URL will just be the URL of the post on Hackmamba, right? So dev.to will do their magic, and Hackmamba does their magic as well, right? So that's something you'll want to do. And I really advise people trying to grow their own blog. It's it's a really it's a really good thing to do and provides like really, really good credibility on your skills. So uh, part of the things to consider when publishing your blog post is also having a banner image and an open graph image. Most publishing platforms would let you upload a cover image for your blog. And we've seen, or statistically, it's been seen that blog posts that have, a really nice cover image that communicates the content of the blog post gets a lot more clicks. So you want to make sure your blog post contains at least one cover image, or contains a cover image. And once you're done publishing this content, you want to share it in communities. You want to share to people. You want to say, "Hey, check this blog post out," right? You want it to reach as many people as possible. And lastly, once your blog post is published, yeah, you thought that was it? No, that's not it. There's still one last step. Is you want to know how successful this blog post is, right? You want to make sure it's getting views, and also you want it to reinforce subsequent blog posts you will create, right? So periodically, you should go check up on this, this post you created, see if you're able to see in-depth statistics or analytics on it. You do just that. You want to see the posts that have the most reads. You want to see the posts with the most comments. In the comments, you could find even ideas for the next blog post. So you want to keep an eye on this blog post. And if you would write another blog post, probably the first one would inform the content of the next. And after the success metrics here, you can go buy yourself a drink because you've just written, your first blog post, your first technical blog post. Just to give a quick recap of the steps. I know I just kept on going. If you have a pen, you could write these down now. But first, you would want to, you want to define the outcome for your blog post. You want to define why you're writing it. Next, we said you want to define who you're writing it for, and you want to have that in mind. Next, we talked about how you want to write the blog post, how you want to structure the title, the outline, how you would write the code. And after that, we got to reviewing the content. How do you review your content? What are things to look out for? What tools like Grammarly and Hemingway app you could use, and also how you could utilize peer reviews to improve the quality of your content. Next, we talked about publishing your content, what platforms you want to put them on, which platforms give you the most reach. And lastly, we talked about success metrics for your blog post. And a thing to note is this applies to not just technical blog posts. A lot of it also applies to slightly non-technical blog posts, like a product management blog post. And with the in the hackathon, you would employ this to create blog posts. And if there are any questions, or if you have any questions on each of these steps, we're always going to be on Discord to answer them. And with this in mind, I would just look in the comments if there are any questions here.